The Phosphorescence by Nicolos Ruddock. The two men left the apartment at 7 Rue Honore-Hugo just before sunrise, dressed identically in black shorts and muscle shirts, walking up the slight grade to the eastern end of Rue Rossetti to the gateway placed there by the city of Nice, the opening for which was cut into stone wall, topped with ornate and perforated wrought iron in green and gold, reaching 4 meters high. And there they entered and turned and headed upwards, beginning to run, shoulder to shoulder, up the switchbacking staircase, taking turns to the inside, 9 steps, and so on, up and up into the semi-manicured pine forest of the chateau, as it was called, though no chateau was there, up through dawn crickets and the slip of pine needles covering the upper reaches of the stairs, until they came to the road which ran in from the north. And empty was the road in the expected coolness of the hour. And now they were going faster, still breathing easily, until they reached the crown of the hill, a paved parking lot concealed or embellished by the irregular ring of low bushes. And on they ran, circling now for their return, settling into the rhythm that they had come to know as theirs, past the lookout on the western precipice, from which, had they stopped, they would have seen beyond the darkness of the sea the airport Côte d'Azur, its runway lights aglitter like a low constellation flattened onto the horizon. But they'd stopped for that once before, 3 nights ago. So now they passed on, shoulder to shoulder, from the parking lot down to the forest, to the dawn crickets, the stairway, the gate, Rue Rossetti again, past stray cats shying away and cafes shuttered, running dead center now in the narrow streets and the half-blind alleys of the old city, until they broke out into the Place Messina, where black and white squares had been inlaid everywhere, like giant chessboards, geometrically conjoined, the squares of the chessboards a blur as the pounding speed of their passing to the Promenade des Anglais, where they turned westward. And already there was traffic, taxis, the first bus, and at last they stopped at the intersection of the Boulevard Gambetta. And they crossed to the sea wall and looked down to the beach. Their eyes accustomed to the dark now, and anyway, the first light was glimmering in from the east. And there they saw the 2 girls. They watched them as they came out of the water, swimming as early as they had been running, returning to their bundled clothes of sleeping bags, lying down, somehow uncaught by the gendarmerie who swept the beaches till 3 a.m. Presumably they had arrived after that, and the 2 men thought wordlessly, simultaneously, that maybe these girls would do. If so, it would save them a lot of trouble. Shrugging, they crossed over to the Hotel de Negresco, entered the lobby and made a phone call from the desk of the concierge, and then settled in to wait. And within the hour, the Caporellis were there, fully awake, walking into the lobby, dressed to the nines as though he had never gone to bed, he with his hair punctiliously swept back and brilliantined, she in a kimono, flowered, immaculate. And immediately the 4 of them left the hotel, took the nearest steps to the beach, stood over the girls who were fast asleep. And again, in a tumble of sleeping bags and backpacks, and Sophia Caporelli bent down, her face lit by the rising sun, which is a limpid quarter scarlatine on the horizon. And she touched the bare shoulder of the nearer girl gently and said in French, kindly, "Forgive me, but we are looking for someone, if possible, for the phosphorescence." And that's how the girls became involved, by falling asleep on a beach and waking up. They weren't sure what the phosphorescence was, but they'd seen signs on the kiosks for it, posters in windows betraying a shower of golden stars, like fireworks, like a starry night. But they'd paid little attention at the time, for they were hungry. They had very little money, and they opted for a baguette and cheese and to sleep, the youth hostel having been closed at midnight on the cobbled beach because it was warm enough to do so. But now here they were, awoke, still dazed within their sleepy heads, by a woman kneeling down to them wearing a kimono, saying something to them, her lipsticked mouth as red as early sun, which had hit her face slantwise, and with her 3 men casting shadows, one white-suited with slick-back hair, and the other 2 in shorts and muscle shirts, hanging back respectfully. And the girls recognized something the woman was saying, the word phosphorescence, in some strange accent of French. So they said first to each other and then to their new acquaintances, "Phosphorescence, okay." As if they knew. And the woman stood up and beckoned for them to come along, inviting them, switching to English. Everything is on the up and up. All they needed was 2 young girls with courage and the right shape, which must have meant to stick thin. Because their 2 regulars, the woman said, are Romanians, were held up at Ventimiglia with passport irregularities. Yet the show must go on. The phosphorescence could hardly be postponed. Okay. In a phalanx of 6, they crossed the Promenade des Anglais, waiting for the green light despite the sparse traffic of the hour. And as a group, they entered the front doors of the Hotel Le Negresco, so the sign up high on the east facing proclaimed. And it was a far cry from the threadbare hostels of Cannes and Marseille. Pausing within, the man with slick-back hair looked at them solicitously and asked, as though he already knew the answer, whether or not they had yet had their petit déjeuner. And of course the answer to that was no. They'd barely woken up. So the men in muscle shirts sat aside incongruously in the lobby with magazines and pamphlets or tourist maps, waiting, while the girls were treated in the contiguous cafe to first a demi-tasse of coffee, dark and rich. Then Belgian waffles heaped up as thick as cobblestones, with strawberries, and for dessert they were offered and accepted apple tarts glistening with melted sugar, and a second tart, this one of peach, equally as sweet. Following which the bill was paid with a quick signature. "You eat like wolves," he said. And the floors over which they then walked to the elevator were made of highly polished marble or terrazzo. And in the mirrors flanking the elevator, they saw their hair, wild, thick a tangle, a mad attractiveness, they thought, wrought from benign neglect, and gilded with the accordion-like doors of the elevator closing upon them under the white-gloved hand of the attendant in his pressed suit of red with gold piping. They clattered upwards on invisible chains or ropes, pressed together in the confined and levitating space to floor numero 6, which, as they disembarked, was much simpler in decor than the lobby, plainer, utilitarian even. Room 5. Directly across from them, just a few steps away, as the white glove closed the latticed door, rattling of the elevator, and the body of the attendant and then his head fell away, as Kimono produced a key from under her loose garment and opened with initial difficulty door number 5, revealing a storeroom. Its dust motes now disturbed, sucked up by the current of their entry from a floor of bare, unpainted wood upon which a thick steel cable lay coiled, filling almost the entirety of the space to knee level, but for, against one wall, leaning haphazardly, 3 tattered papier-mâché constructions, bizarre and multicolored in the rough shape of humans, but with outsized heads. And to the left, a squat range of ancient Krieg lights wrapped in electrical cords, the ends of which were frayed and inexpertly taped. And in the far wall was the only window, cut at shoulder level, a narrow rectangular slit, the lower sill of which was blackened with the desiccated bodies of cluster flies. A desert odor of dryness, dust and steel. Above them, presumably, the cupola, the dome of Hotel Negresco overlooking the bay, the crescent azure bay at Nice. "So, let's begin," said the man. And the strong men bent to their task, found one end of the cable, snapped it to the ring provided in the stone wall, unlatched the dirt-encrusted window, levering it outwards as best they could until it complained, creaking with age, until its hinges of rust were bent outwards to an angle of 45 degrees. And then slowly and with care, they began to feed the wire 2 centimeters in diameter, raising each coil with strained against its circular memory, feeding it through the narrow opening to the street below. And when their task was half finished, the man with slick-back hair turned to the waiting girls and asked them to remove their outer clothing. "Oh, not everything, thank you. Just their shorts and t-shirt, that they might put on instead the costumes provided. Formerly worn," he said, with apparent regret, "by our 2 sweethearts now trapped at the border by government officials, cretins of conformity, no doubt." And the new girls did as they were asked, and thus were standing in their underwear before the gaze of kimono. The strong men, too busy to notice, their feet braced against the base of the wall, gloves of leather for the incremental slips in the cable as it fell away. And in turn, the girls stepped, self-consciously, into the preferred one-piece swimsuits of blue silk, or perhaps faux silk, identical, adorned by short golden knots, tassels falling from the neckline to waist, marred by a few irregular spots of brown, possibly rust, staining the material in a pattern similar to that seen on eggs of birds of prey. Then came, "The harness, please," of which there were also 2, taken from a worn valise in the corner. "Wear it thusly, like so, around the waist, yes, and cinch it up, excuse me, here, between the legs. Oh, good, that's good, there." While the strong men finished up, one of them clapping his hands in satisfaction as the interior cable now hung slack through the portal, though much of its length still remained in the room, abutting their ankles and feet in such a way that they had to step gingerly like gymnasts. But all present seemed satisfied. As the girls' costumes were reappropriated, repacked into the one valise, and they put on their own clothes again, their prosaic bleached out by summer wear. And they were back in the elevator. All 6 of them again, the troop, down and out into the sun-provoked street, where the cable now lay half on the road, half on the sidewalk, overseen there by 2 police cars which had been pulled up at angles, squawk boxes blaring, the avenue in both directions now closed to traffic. The strongmen beginning phase 2, which was to half roll, half carry the widened coils, dull silver now in reflected light filtering through the high palms, to pull them across the eerily still street, past the waiting cars, across the path reserved for the cyclists and for pedestrians, under the high globe lights which ran the length of the esplanade, ornate with curlicued standards, until, finally, here was the low railing which set the beach apart, the beach the girls had slept upon, small waves now making their uniform impressions on the shore with quiet regularity as the men took to a yellow rowboat waiting there, with thole-pins instead of oarlocks, and therein and thereupon they loaded the rest of the cable, standing waist-deep in the water until, that task completed, they pulled themselves over the awkward tilt of the gunwales and, taking 1 oar each, rowed in synchrony straight out from shore, bending, rising, bending to their task, stopping only to ease the unraveling of the cord into the sea behind them, until they came to a circular buoy of green glass, after the fashion of those used by Japanese fishermen whose nets and paraphernalia are torn by Pacific storms. And to this unusual buoy, they made fast, then grasped the loose end of the cable and dove overboard, disappearing, only to reappear and then disappear again. Attaching the cable end, the girls learned later, to a concrete mass in the shape of a battle rampart on the floor of the sea, weighing 8 tons and complete with winch, electrified, which was now activated. And as they watched, holding to the side of their empty yellow boat now, severely canted by their weight, as the cable slowly stretched itself and rose high, high, higher still, from the seabed below to the tiny slit window above on the 6th floor of the Hotel Negresco, taut as a violin string over a distance of at least 200 meters. And the strong men, now smiling, rowing back to shore while silent gulls wheeled overhead as they hauled the yellow boat above the mark for high tide, above the flotsam and jetsam and plastic bottles not yet picked up by the patrols. Coarse pebbles and stones turning under their feet as they pushed and pulled. And then they all walked up together to the littoral, to the railing, to the esplanade, the wire glistening high overhead. Kimono, with her cherry mouth, her white skin, her formality. And by the stoplight, the man with slick back hair produced 50 francs each for the girls, who then spent the afternoon resting under a rented umbrella. And, as arranged, in the evening they returned at 9 to the promenade, already jammed from the doors of the Hotel Negresco to the edge of the Mediterranean. 5,000 onlookers there must have been, or 10,000 even. Several bands hammering away on drums and horns, colored lights strung from the same ornate standards that had been cold and bare in the morning. Lights circled around the sinuous trunks of the royal palms, and there was one of the strongmen wordlessly ushering them through the lobby. Phalanxed together like starlets through a pushing crowd amidst the flash of light bulbs, up the ratcheting elevator to the storeroom number 5, where again they undressed, this time to nakedness. The putting on of silk, the gold tassels, the leather harnesses snapped, click, first to their waists, and then to the stainless steel pulleys now suspended from the wire, 2 meters of which remained stretched inside, held fast by the embedded ring. While from the street below came a booming of timpani, a rattle of snare drums, a descant of expectancy. And Kimono was there suddenly saying, "Remember, hold up your arms and tuck your hair like this. And this is Vaseline. I am putting it here on the back of your neck for protection." And thus the phosphorescence unfolded as planned. The first girl was lifted to the window. Was that a pat on the back? Pretzeled herself through the opening and extended her arms into a V despite the chasm of uncertainty below. Held fast there was by the harnessed pulley overhead and by the strong man's hands upon her ankles, while a weight, a backpack of some kind, was strapped fast to her shoulders. And the smell of butane, or propane, or alcohol touched her nostrils. Then a cracking sound, a flash, and she felt the heat of flame down. Down she went, released into a feathering ball of fireworks of white, red and gold, sparks shimmering from what appeared from below to be her wings. Down and away, suspended from the wire, hurtling, the pulley hissing reptilian above her. And she felt the initial breath-sucking drop from gravity, then the slanting fall through the night palms, lights running up to her and brushing by, the beach below, the sea the darkness, then cold, the sizzling of hot cordite as she hit the ocean hard. Unprepared for this, stunned. And from shore, the gathered thousands saw what they had come to see, the phosphorescence. Phosphorescence charged from the impact zone. Phosphorescence fused and lit in green and blue and red. An aurora pulsing. A trillion microplankton lit by the fallen girl who had herself been lit by fire. And the fire was contagious. It spread outwards, unsmothered to the horizon, subaquatic, shimmering in a pulse, undiminished. While under the surface, she couldn't breathe. The harness was pinned to the cable, drowning her. She tried to rise, to swim, until quick hands were upon her from behind and a mask of oxygen was clamped to her face, and she was pulled up to the yellow boat, the surface, where now she hung by one arm, side by side with the second strongman, who said something to her in a language she didn't understand, his arm around her shoulders. And she watched what she had just done, her friend on her way down now. The same V, the same fire, the fool, the boom of timpani, Hotel de Negresco, the palms, the summer nights, the invisible wire, the smash or crash landing 10 feet away, and then the golden pulsing, the throbbing, the color of the sea changing green to Africa, the phosphorescence for the thousands watching from the shore, for the two girls from Sept-Îles, Quebec, where beaches were too wild ever to be slept upon amid squalls of rain, sleet and snow from Labrador, from Greenland, where St. Lawrence River blended seamlessly into the North Atlantic, the sun low at the zenith of wintertime, the pallid flickering green from their own modest phosphorescence, rocks thrown 10 feet from shore. Their life as it had been before this summer night in Nice, before they ran the wire. Shaky, chilled, they were rowed back to shore forthwith by the strongman, who let go of the oars at the last instant, pulling them up and out of the thole-pins, leaping from the prow into the shallows, surf breaking waist-high upon his back and legs, the grinding of the wooden keel on stone amidst what was now pandemonium on the waterfront. The stretched-out arms of the gendarmerie, cordoning off an area of perhaps 30 meters from the flash of cameras, the pressing throng, multi-sourced roars coming from the street, from timpani, accordions, sirens, amplified voices booming down upon them, as though it were a carnival, which it was, they realized. Standing behind both strongmen now, just a few meters from the sea, uncertainly, the strongmen shielding them physically from the gaze of the crowd, which, by its insistence, was growing closer to them, despite the phalanx of officers. And just as they had descended effortlessly down to the sea along the wire, now for the return journey, they were picked up suddenly in the arms of the strongmen, as effortlessly as though they were small children in their silk and tassels, their hair unruly, soaked from a bath, backpacks of fire gone now, stripped from them in the boat, and thus they were carried. The Phosphoresense, as they were now called, apparently. Phosphoresense! Phosphoresense! By hundreds of voices, carried through hoarse clamor up the steps of the embankment, where white toweling was wrapped around them for warmth, under the fin de siècle lamps of the promenade, under the palms. The wire, no doubt, still there, though not from this angle visible, straight through the front doors of the Hotel de Negresco, which were held open for them by men in tunics of blue and red. Faux military, ancien regime, allowing them to enter the hotel while simultaneously, in the manner of those well-trained in practice, repulsing those not wanting from gaining ingress. Then Kimono was there. and the girls could stand on their own in the pale white lobby. Their towels as soft carapaces. The monstrous chandelier of the Hotel Negresco, golden white above their heads. And cool was the floor of marble or terrazzo under their feet as the man with slick-back hair and kimono, the Caporellis, together, led the way to the elevator. The journey they had done twice already earlier, but now surely this extraordinary experience was over. The strongmen were still in their shorts, with shirts soaked tight to their chests, implacable, never meeting the eyes of the girls despite the close companionship, the mutual embraces under the shock of 5 meters of water, arms around each other, shoulders and waists, the classical position of lovers, though they were not lovers. And up they went in the caged elevator to the 6th floor, to the life-size humanoid broken sculptures, the Krieg lights covered in dust, the rusted window, the cable still taut to the wall, straining, to their own street coats placed neatly, cleaned and ironed, though it was but 20 minutes. Was that possible, since last they had been there? They were laid upon 2 chairs, and Kimono told them to dress. The strongmen turned away, while the Caporellis, less shy, watched them as they stripped their costumes to the floor and naked stepped back into the familiarity of their own clothing, bent to their own running shoes, becoming themselves again. After which they were given an envelope of some francs for what you have done for us, in the form of a thick packet bound in brown paper and pinched with elastic bands, crisscrossed, a packet which they were advised to place in the depths of one of their backpacks, like so, the man with slick-back hair said, lest it be carelessly lost. But perhaps you are not altogether like our Romanians. And he went ahead and demonstrated his solicitude by placing the envelope himself, tucking it into one of the side pockets and closing the drawstrings, after which they were kissed on both cheeks by the Caporellis, man and wife, told they had done an extraordinary job under the difficult circumstances, that they had, well, matched our Romanians, whatever they are in beauty and courage, and dare we say, bettered them in attitude. And here are your sleeping bags, giving one to each strong man to carry for them. And it was suggested that they leave the Hotel Negresco without delay, by the back door, to which they would be guided by our men, for if they were to venture out now upon the promenade, they would be quickly recognized. Their photographs having been broadcast widely on television, their physical descriptions meticulously detailed on radio. In fact, now they were famous. They were the Phosphoresense. And the reputation of the paparazzi on the Riviera was well earned. Sophia Caporelli said, as feral dogs or jackals, wanting only to chew and spit out the lives of mostly women, who had, by virtue of talent or beauty or inherited wealth, become celebrities, however briefly. Thus, the girls, wearing their backpacks and looking nothing like celebrities, left the Hotel Negresco through one of the back entrances, led by the strongmen through a door purposely built to be inconspicuous. And the street on which they found themselves, Rue de Commandant Beretta, was quiet, dark, as befitted the hour. Nor was this street illuminated by the otherwise ubiquitous globe lights common to the city centre. But the tumult from the waterfront was audible, of course, just a block away, celebratory, carnivalesque, a cacophony which began to fade as they turned left to Rue Rivoli, walking now along a seemingly endless fence of a type they'd only seen in Spain and France, with tall, thin, tightly spaced iron bars in black, tipped with spears of gold, going on forever, reaching nearly to the night sky as though cost were absolutely irrelevant. Beyond which, through cheese and parkland, They caught glimpses of a magnificent public building in ghostly white, ethereal, as all such architectural masterpieces seem to be in Nice. A building which they could not identify, for there were no signs for that purpose here. And turning right at the next intersection, they followed the east-west wall of black and golden spears towards, they understood, their destination. The youth hostel, which had been closed to them the night before because of the lateness of their arrival. And as they walked, the environs began to assume the face of a normal city rather than that of a festive or regal one. Shuttered stores, restaurants with street-front patios, waiters busy or idle, bars from which shouts emerged, students or workmen going home, scooters, cyclists, a late grocery store, cars idling half on the sidewalk, half off. And through this they weaved their way, the girls close by, for they were lost otherwise, until, as a sign indicated, they were at the Auberge Jeunesse Saint-Exupéry on Rue Sacha-Guitry, and the strong men pushed open the heavy door and spoke quickly to the concierge, who was, it appeared, no older than the girls and patently uninterested in their arrival, for he was reading a book by André Gide, the title of which was not visible, the upper half of the cover of the paperback having been torn away. And the young man finally said, perhaps they should take the two beds on the girls' only side, for evidently, smiling now, they were girls, and evidently unaccompanied by friends of their own age. To which the strong men nodded in agreement, and one of the strong men then suggested that the girls' backpacks be placed in a secure location under lock and key. And one of them produced some more francs, crumpled, counting them out carefully, adding smaller coins which spun on the counter, saying, well, this should be enough for a week, should the girls wish to stay that long. To which the young man nodded assent and put down his book reluctantly, took the money and the backpacks and disappeared behind another door, to emerge a few seconds later with a card, use of which, he explained, would give the girls access to their quarters before midnight, after which he would no longer be there and the hostel would be closed. This hostel, which has, he said, been named after a war hero and writer, Saint-Exupéry, yet is situated ironically on a street, Sacha-Guitry, named for a man accused in 1944 of collaboration with the Nazis. Though what do you care about that? The young man said, for you're all foreigners. Then he was speaking of something else, but no one was really listening at that time, because evidently it was time to say goodbye. And the two strong men, as they had not done before, looked directly at the girls they had found upon the beach that morning, girls whom they had several times in the course of duty held in their arms, and they said goodbye. Their accents certainly from an eastern extreme of Europe, speaking nevertheless clearly but without emotion, as their job was finished. And they turned and were gone. And the young man at the desk, his Guide bookmarked by his fingers, raised his eyebrows to the girls as if to say, what could you two be doing with men like that? And he proceeded to say out loud, it's true that we're closed after midnight, but if you're interested, a little secret. In 1 hour, my friends and I will be going out to a club not far from here for dancing, and you're invited if you are discreet. No one will know. As they had let themselves be taken to Hotel Negresco with little or no circumspection that morning, so an hour later the girls found themselves walking down narrow alleyways in what they were told was the old port area of the city of Nice, and black was the darkness there with streetlights broken or malfunctioning, to a carnivorous warehouse where glitter lights rolled in the ceiling and strobes flashed ceaselessly and thousands were dancing rhythmically to music strangely guiding through for unfamiliar scales, Under the beat of drums, African or Turkish or Azerbaijan, no one seemed to know for sure. And they were handed drinks. No alcohol! It's the truth, I promise! By Andre Guide and by his three friends who were giddy upon the dance floor themselves. And despite the no alcohol, after a second and third drink of the same, here, take this, cold like strawberries, they became dizzy, as though drugged. And they broke into sweats and fell into each other, dancing while Guide and his friends laughed, wholly unconcerned over the girls' evident plight. Girls who were frightened now, as they had not been when they ran the wire to the sea. And desolation was their sudden visitor, a hollowness and an echoing within. And through the strobes and seizure lights, they then saw in the hands of Andre Guide a packet of brown paper crisscrossed with elastics. And he was throwing banknotes in the air, shouting, Les Phosphoresense! And he was pointing at them. And the crush of slavering crowd hurried down upon them, pushing them down a narrow corridor, past washrooms and closets, until Guide fought his way through to them, saying, "To the rescue! To the rescue!" Apparently having the time of his life, joyous even, pulling them through a doorway which had seemingly initially been locked, but flew open as they made their escape, which he then jammed tight behind him as they were outside now, in the night air. His three friends waiting. None of them were laughing now. Far from it. They were coming closer. Their hands now on the girls' breasts, on their shorts, jammed up between their legs, forcing them down to the dirt, to torn paper, empty bottles, cans, and the grit of the alleyway. And all the girls could say was no, repeating it like children would. And Guide was repeatedly saying, "Oh, my little Phosphoresense," unbuckling himself, until two quick percussive sounds, like watermelons falling from a great height. And Guide's head hit the wall just above where the girls lay, and his body became puppet-like, falling to the same filth into which his intended victims had been ground face down. His limbs no longer his, unconscious, staring. Friends running and gone. The alley was empty now. What was left of Guide? The girls barely astir. But there were two strong men bending down and lifting them up, turning away, as always, while the girls fixed as best they could the remnants of their clothes. Then wordlessly, the four of them walked away, hand in hand, back through the night streets to Rue de Lazarette, to a taxi. And later that same night, an hour before sunrise, the strong men left their apartment on 7 Rue Henri Hugo and walked side by side up the gradual incline of Rue Rossetti, turning through the same stone and wrought iron gate as they had before. And they began to run up switchback stairs into the semi-manicured woods, the dawn crickets, the parking lot hidden by low bushes. But this time they stopped, purposefully, as the western lookout at the waist-high wall provided by the city of Nice, from which they could see the airport Côte d'Azur, from which by now the girls had already left for Paris on Air France, and thence to Montreal. They stood for a minute. Then down the hill they went, shoulder to shoulder, through the narrow streets and the half-blind alleys, Place Messina, faster now, along the Promenade d'Anglais, to the Hotel Negresco, which had already returned to normalcy, stripped of its lights and music, of pomp and circumstance. And there they stopped and looked down at the beach, where there was no evidence now but for the little yellow boat of the millimeter-deep flash of brilliance wrought by fire and by chemistry, by the living microplankton shuddering green and gold towards Africa, glowing so briefly in a layer no thicker than skin.